So what you just watched was a television ad that ran on the 2019 Super Bowl on behalf of Washington Post, but more generally on behalf of journalism. Now, the Washington Post, we're going to, in our brief history, we're going to touch on the Washington Post. But the Washington Post was a paper that was falling on hard times, as pretty much all newspapers have. But the Post was rescued by a knight in shining, or shall I say, by an Amazon warrior in shining armor, who can afford Super Bowl ads at $5 million for 30 seconds. But an interesting statement, I think, nevertheless. Okay, so we've looked at, talked about some of the issues facing media, and we're reading about them all every day, whatever our news source is. Now I want to kind of step back, and just look at an overview of how different media types have developed in our country since it was started back in the 1700s. And we'll just touch on each of the media types and say a little bit about it and kind of sort of set the stage for getting in more depth into each media type as we move forward. Okay, so, and that's our little visual, by the way, for the brief history of advertising and media in the U.S. So, started with out-of-home media. You know what out-of-home media are? It's posters and billboards and bus advertising and bus shelter advertising and kiosk advertising and subway advertising and train advertising. It's videos that run in elevators and sports clubs and malls. It's all around us as we go out of our home and kind of wander through life, working, shopping, playing, whatever we may be up to. That's out of home. Next came the development of newspapers after some technologies enabled that. Magazines, full color, printed word, great way to spend a couple of hours of leisure if you're lucky enough to have it every once in a while. Then again, some technological innovations gave us broadcast radio networks that carried advertising to make themselves profitable businesses, much like Facebook had to do. Then television, a little glitch, or not a glitch, but shall we say a tweak of the technology. Same technology that enabled radio, enabled the sending of a visual and an audio impression, shall we say, and then we have television and the television networks, which really ruled the roost. 3 TV networks. I think you know there are 2 of them up there now. I hope you probably know the third one. Another 3-letter acronym. Television and television networks ruled the roost. Boy, that's hard to say, everybody. And to some degree, well, they just still have a lot of influence today. So their golden days kind of faded, but they're still up there. They still get a lot of money. And television advertising and a full motion picture on a big screen with sound is still a very, very effective, if not the most effective, impression. You all remember what an impression is. An impression is one person seeing one ad one time. More technological innovation led to the internet, and then led to wireless internet through these devices we carry with us at all times, our mobile phones. And so starting with out-of-home all the way up to cellular phones. So I wanted to just pull out separately the technological advances that impacted the rise and fall of different media types. The first one bears noting is the invention of the movable type printing press by Gutenberg. It's interesting, I just read an article about this in the Atlantic that basically said what Gutenberg did is not so dissimilar to what Facebook and the internet and social networks are doing now in terms of how it spread information. And basically, for the first time, information, not so much entertainment, some entertainment, but a lot of information could be printed on paper relatively cheaply, bound up into books, and people could get their hands on them. So, and pass them around. And whether it was a book or a pamphlet or a one-page screed of some kind, information was communicated into the middle class and into the masses. Information and knowledge prior to this time had been hoarded by the upper classes and by the religious organizations, the monasteries, etc. These would be the keepers of the books and the scribes and the writers of the words. And this changed with Gutenberg and gave rise fairly quickly to Martin Luther, who printed a bill of particulars and nailed it, they say, to a church door, a Catholic church door. I think he was fed up, among other things, with people having to pay to, buy their dead relatives time off in purgatory, et cetera, et cetera. And so we had the rise of the Lutheran movement, and we had the rise of Protestantism. And if you're a Protestant of one kind, and many denominations go under the heading Protestant, the first two syllables there are protest, you may notice. So these were protests with the Catholic Church, really enabled by movable type printing press. And of course, at the same time, you had to be able to make the paper. So presses and paper manufacturing moved over to the colonies. And in fact, an early and famous colonist made his living as a printer, and that fellow's name was Benjamin Franklin, who apprenticed to his older brother when he was like 14, I think. His brother had a printing shop in Boston. Benjamin got tired of that and wanted his own printing shop. I think went to London for a while and got some backers and moved to Philadelphia. So another major hub, a few days ride from Boston on the Boston Post Road, and started his own printing business, printed his own newspapers and booklets and things, and actually became wealthy from it, got a lot of government contracts, and retired at a fairly young age and pursued his interest in science and in government. Steam power, the next big technological advancement. All of a sudden we had these engines that could, as opposed to human labor or some kind of animal labor, we could harness the power of steam. Steam also made electricity, by the way. Steam ran boats, steam ran locomotives, and locomotive tracks were laid across much of the world. In the United States, the railroad barons were huge, were like the internet billionaires of today in many ways. These guys had monopolies and certain rights to geographies where they could run and have the only railroad. Finally, the Transcontinental Railroad was laid right around the time of the Civil War. And these steam-powered engines meant that printing presses for newspapers could publish bigger and more newspaper. Also, the railroad tracks, interestingly, became the arteries along which telegraph wires were stretched, which gets us to our next kind of invention and technological advancement, the harnessing of electricity. It was always there, but a lot of people, including Thomas Edison very famously, finally harnessed it to some amazing usage, like with electric light bulbs lighting up a city. This was the next, and I think very, very equivalent to what's happened with the internet. Basically, the internet is like electrifying information, and the electrical I'm going to call it revolution, where cities and towns and states and countries were wired for electricity. And that electricity allowed all kinds of improvements to life. It was getting power, getting energy through these wires to run machines and make our daily lives better. It lit the room, it ran radios, ran TVs, and just think about what we would do without electricity. By the way, also think about what it takes to generate electrical power. And let us not forget that burning coal and fuels like that, which we have done for decades, had a very bad effect on our air quality, and is one of the reasons we're in the dire environmental place that we are now. So like a lot of things, some new technology brings good things and it brings bad things. So with electricity, first it was the telegraph, which could even be wireless, as on the Titanic. Titanic had an early telegraph set up, which did broadcast. I don't think they had SOS yet as a signal, but they broadcast their distress message for miles and miles, and it did reach some ships at sea that were really too far away to be of much help, unfortunately. But telegraph wires also carried messages from the Union and Confederate armies back from the battle site to the people who ran the politics. So Abraham Lincoln would go down to the telegraph office every morning to see what came in and what had happened on the battlefields, which you could get immediately, as opposed to getting it from some person riding on a horse or a carrier pigeon or something like that. So radio waves were the next one. Radio waves also were always with us, part of the electromagnetic spectrum. But some genius invented a way to send, to translate sounds into radio waves that could go wirelessly some great distances and then be picked up by receivers and turned back into sound, similar to what happened, of course, with the telephone, which was not wireless. That was really wire to wire. But kind of telephone and radio came up, fairly similar times. It's kind of amazing new inventions. And that was the next advancement. Then, as I think I said before, some brilliant people invented a way to send a picture along with a sound on a different length of the radio wave. So the same electromagnetic waves, but a different frequency, were used to send television wirelessly to your antenna on top of your roof in the old days, that sent radio signals. Then, of course, computing became more and more powerful, and before too long, people invented this idea of housing information in different data storage areas that could be accessed and called out with codes to show up on your computer, eventually your phone. And then this whole idea of almost instantaneous communication with information sources and with each other and with Lord knows what becomes the internet. And all of a sudden, almost all of human information is something you can access from the phone that you hold in your hand. And it's instantaneous. So it's fast, it's vast, it's fast, it's vast. It's with us all the time, and it's in our hand, and it's a mobile phone. This is the radio wave spectrum. I know it's a very complicated slide, but just focus in on the left here. You've got AM radio as one set of wavelengths. And look, remote-controlled toys were given a set of wavelengths. Those work on radio waves. UHF channels, GPS systems, satellite radio, cable TV satellite transmissions, highway toll tags are on the radio band. So what's happened is that governments have said they've taken the radio wave spectrum and they've allocated different size waves for different applications. And microwaves are also there. And cell phones are also in radio waves. How about that? So the same technology that started radio and then TV is also used for our mobile phones.